Welcome to Out of the Blank.
Welcome to another episode of Out of the Blank podcast. A lot of strange things have been happening in the wilderness, and by the wilderness, I mean the world. Apparently, the government is now assigning a task force to UFO research, and I don't know what to think of anything that's going on today. Massimo, it's a pleasure to have you back on the show, and Campbell, it's a pleasure to have you as well, too.
Thank you very much.
Now, Campbell, you want to take this direction because I'm just going to wait to ask my questions.
Okay. Well, it's wonderful to have an opportunity to speak with you, Dr. Teodorani. We first touched base about a year ago when I contacted you related to your potential appearance on the Singularity Lab, Michael Mataluni's show, based on my reading online about your work in Hesdalen. And that is something that I am really keen to get into today. Would you be able to just explain briefly how you first found out about Assistant Professor Erling Strand's work in Hesdalen?
Yeah, well, it was in 1992, 1 month after I obtained my PhD in astronomy. I was in a flea market hunting for books. And UFO books, because I was curious. I didn't have time before to study these things that was pestering my subconscious. I was curious. In fact, I found many UFO books, and they were so boring, 5,000, so boring that I gave almost all away. I kept only 10 of the good ones. Among those, there was a book by Jenny Randles, who is a very prominent figure in the ufology, in serious ufology of Britain. And I was there looking at the book. It fell on the ground, just on a page. And that page was an appendix at the end where it was written Project Hesdalen. So I looked at that. Astronomy-like methods can be used to study UFOs. Oh, that's very interesting, because I will stop to be bored by all those stories, tales and things. But the idea to have a possibility to measure the phenomenon in areas where the phenomenon occurs very often, like Hesdalen in Norway, but also like in Yakima, Marfa, in Texas, Brown Mountain. There are many others in the world, less popular, but quite famous. And so the idea to think about a project to use astronomical methods on the photonic physics is the same. It was very exciting, technically speaking, because we enjoy only when we know that we can turn our findings into numbers. Because when you turn all of that into numbers, you can put them on a chart and then see how these physical parameters vary with time or with space. And then you can deduce an equation. So this is exactly what we want to do. The problem is that it's not like stars. It's not that we have coordinates. We know the coordinates of the star. We point a telescope and the star is there. In this case, it's a random phenomenon. But the fact that there are areas of the world where this thing is recurrent, very much like in Hesdalen, makes these places the almost ideal laboratory areas for our research. In fact, now inside the Galileo project, there is a group to which I participated in the beginning, not anymore now, to try to choose the ideal location where to place the new instrumentation that is being implemented right now at the Harvard University, with which I am collaborating. In fact, I would say the Harvard project of Professor Loeb is the ideal evolution of what already happened by Professor Ellingstrand, Ines Dahlen, me, and a few other collaborators with up-to-date instrumentation sensors that can help us in the first phase to identify what we are seeing. First of all, in phase 1, we want to see what is that. In the phase 2, which will follow soon, I hope after 1 year, maximum 2 years, we want to go into it analytically. So using some instrumentation like spectrograph, polarimeters, and high-speed photometers in order to go more in depth in the thing, with the same spirit with which we are studying variable stars. It's the same, exact same philosophy, whatever the phenomenon is. It could be a natural phenomenon. It could be something that is human, coming from a technology of which we are not aware of, maybe from China, from Russia, or it could be exogenous, okay? If it's exogenous, clearly the variability of its physical parameters measured all simultaneously might help us to understand, to get some hints about the propulsion mechanism, but also about the physical behavior of phenomena like ball lightning, which sometimes might look like you know, something alien, something impressive, emitting beam of light. People is telling, oh, this is a, how to say, a super weapon, the death ray or something. No, in some cases, it can happen that a ball lightning kind object can emit beams that are moving randomly everywhere, such as in the case that happened in Colares in Brazil 40 years ago. So we have to open only to the data. We can speculate, yes, but this is speculation. And this one is data and then data analysis. So this is a resume more or less of what you were asking.
Well, if we talked about like how difficult it would be to try and monitor, be able to look at these exact nodes, because you can't really pinpoint when someone's going to see what they would call an extraterrestrial intelligence. Has anybody ever put any weight into the aspect that you mentioned earlier about, like, is it a human created phenomenon? Maybe not weapon technology, but if we talk about maybe the area of the consciousness that we really don't understand, like the full capabilities or scope of it. Like, I don't understand space plasma. I really don't. But if you start talking about a lot of the environmental factors and people I've talked to with the magnetic field of Earth and other types of situations where we can look at maybe some type of weather phenomena, I start to wonder, is it much like seeing a cloud with our minds? The weird thing to me is that the prevalence of aliens has now been established by the government as creating a task force for it. But not only just that, but the number of encounters and a number of people that have seen or talked about seeing one. And I start going, is this something like what David Halpern said to me one time, where we're channeling it out of us? I mean, I'm not saying we're conjuring a beast out of our souls. I'm just saying maybe there's a part of our consciousness that we really, I mean, we don't understand the full scopes of it. There are people that study consciousness that don't really understand what that is. And I start wondering, is this something that maybe like a magnetic field issue or something about our weather climate or something that's causing us to see these things? And we're also wanting to see aliens. We're looking up in the sky not to see stars sometimes. We're looking for, is anything different, anything an anomaly? Now, I give weight to anomalies like a Moa that came. I give weight to that. I think that there is maybe an influence of government tech. There might be influence of extraterrestrials, but how much to say the majority might actually be people just seeing something because they want to see it? You know, they're whatever they would call willing it into the universe. I'm not saying it's that type of thing, but I mean, you talk so much about something or you think about someone, for instance, and then you get a text from that person. That's a coincidence, is what people call that. I mean, could this be the same thing that we want to see UFOs? We want to see this. And this is how we get so many different examples of them, because we're picturing that one in our mind, and our consciousness happens to be this thing that's, I mean, it's unexplainable in a sense. We don't know how far the limits or where it really goes in a sense. It's like space.
Yes, you are raising an important problem, which is not exactly in my field of study, but the consciousness issue is in reality very important due to several reasons. The first one, you mentioned synchronicities. We have to acknowledge this. There was a physicist, director of the physics department in Missouri. I think it was Missouri in Piedmont. He organized a campaign of observations, something like Stalin, but 5 years before Stalin. He started to monitor with his PhD students an area where phenomena were occurring very often. The strange thing, and he was not ashamed to tell this, Dr. Harley Rutledge, he published a book, Project Identification, for who is interested. He noticed that all the actions that they were doing, like turning on a camera or moving the camera to the opposite direction, every movement, every decision that they were doing was synchronous with some actions of those lights in the sky, like if they knew what people was thinking. So he said that this was a very rigorous physicist. He does a lot of calculations, but he said, I have to take notice of this. So this is a consciousness issue that maybe it has something to do with that phenomenon. Then there is another aspect of consciousness. There are some researchers who are in different field than mine that speak about a co-creation process, where our consciousness co-create something outside. For me, it's interesting, this idea, but it's difficult to enter in because I cannot make something quantitative of this. But then it would be like a paranormal phenomenon that has nothing to do with anything else. Our mind could create maybe sort of hallucinations, also collective hallucination, because if telepathy exists, and I think it does exist, and I think it's a physical phenomenon, all consider that many persons could be entangled all together, and if someone have an hallucination and thinks he sees something, all the others see the same thing. So a collective hallucination. That's the reason why also psychologists, neurophysiologists, sociologists must study the problem in parallel with what physicists are doing, because the consciousness issue, with no doubt, is extremely important, extremely interesting. By the way, in 2007, I was with a colleague, another physicist, a woman, Dr. It's not important to tell the name anyway. And we thought of an experiment to see if there is a communications between our mind and those lights. Okay, is it so? Well, this looks like very new agey. Okay, in reality, it's possible. How is it possible to measure this? Because this is what is important, measuring. So we thought that we could make a parallel measurements of the light phenomenon with our normal instruments and use a laser beam and aim the laser beam towards the light. Could be a plasma or could be whatever that is strange. At the same time, we monitor what's happening inside our brain using a EEG apparatus and see if something is happening in our brain wave. If there is a synchronous reaction between a light reaction from the UFOs, let's call them so, from our beam, and at the same time our brain change form of the brain wave, this would demonstrate that our mind and that phenomenon are in some way entangled. So we can measure this. It's possible. I presented this experiment in Austria, Salzburg, at the physics department about quantum mind congress about the physical study about consciousness. So yes, it's very interesting, this part, but it's also mind-boggling, completely mind-boggling.
I would think that if you could attach a laser to some of these naval ships that apparently keep coming into interactions with all of these types of phenomena or unexplainable UFOs that they want to call it, that would probably be a best spot to implement that. I mean, if that's where they're commonly being seen, it seems like everyone has a story about them occurring over water, which I just bring up the example of mirages as well, too. I mean, you see that because there's a lack of water, but you'll see like a random puddle and then you'll drive up to it. Next thing you know, that puddle disappears. I mean, I don't know what our minds can conjure up. I can explain that might be some of the lumps of alien calls, but then we get into this realm of like, we have radar systems that are also picking up something. So if it's electric, if it's some type of thing that does pop up that maybe we don't have sorted out, like a fish finder, you can pick up random things on there all the time. And there's other things that you can't pick up. So I wonder if this is something that's just manipulating a frequency, which I bring back to, oh God, I'm going to forget the Carrington event. Was it like 19 something or 18 something, or no, I think it was like 1950 something. It was in Brazil. They talked about electricity in the air where people could use their walkie-talkies without batteries. So I mean, this isn't a random occurrence. This is something that might have happened prehistory. I mean, you might have had many accounts of this. I think a lot of people from the UFO community, well, how do you explain the ancient Egyptians talking about aliens or all these folklores? I go, because they were probably seeing something that we're seeing now. Something about our Earth creates something maybe with our magnetic field or something that calls us to see it.
It was a solar activity. It was a huge coronal mass ejection that created ultra big quantity of electrons in our atmosphere. So this could explain the reason why radios are working without battery or something, because there is extra electron, in the atmosphere. So in this case, it was coming from the sun. And this can be explained very well with the solar activity, with no doubt that sometimes it can happen. And it can be also very destructive because it can burn transformers, resistors. It can kill the GPS systems of the airplanes. It can do a lot of problems. And in that case, it was due to the sun. Carrington.
So I still want to bring in the aspect of you have to be intelligent enough to look at the data and want the data. You have to have those scientific answers, but at the same time, you can't be arrogant to think that we would be the only intelligent life in the solar system. So I just bring that to the table for anybody listening that's maybe like they're denying UFOs. No, that's not what it is, but there is a large pool for evidence now, and there's a weight being put in this topic, especially from US government standpoints, where I just say, I'm leaving all options on the table. I'm bringing out some explanations maybe for some occurrences, but there's also some things I can't explain where I say, maybe that's tech that we haven't seen before. I just watched a video of a guy with a drone in the shape of a UFO, and he was flying it, and the thing zoomed like faster than I've ever seen anything zoom before. Now, am I saying, is it the same thing? No, but maybe it might. You got to think of all these factors that could chalk up to these experiences that people are seeing. But it makes me want to question more experiencers. It makes me want to question more about things that we can scientifically test. Like, is there, we talk about collective memory, which is a thing that you can learn about when everyone kind of experiences the same exact event and they all choose to remember it the same exact way. Necessarily doesn't mean you remember it the same way. For instance, I could meet you in person, Massimo. I could meet you in person, Campbell. And then that one time, split second, whatever you want to say, next thing you know, I remember, oh, he had like a really, like, he had a nice curly mustache. He had a really thick beard and mutton chops. It's like, how does he have a beard and mutton chops? But it's my brain starting to create a scenario because it can't remember the full thing. So it tries to fill in the divots, much like your picture does with the pixels on it. So I think there's weight to be put in a multifactorial situation when it comes to UAPs. But it's just, now it's becoming an even more fascinating topic where I'm starting to see more studies be done about it. But is it necessarily being done in an effective way? I feel like people like Massimo, who have really good ideas of strategies that could be implemented to research these types of things, are not really being talked about, at least on the major global fronts when it comes to a giant newscast or something like that, where people can see it in the public. And I feel like that's where I start going, they're not taking it seriously, much like me and Campbell talked with Larry Hancock about this. You have to look at this and reach out to all options and avenues, no matter if it's a scientific study that is going to be very, very hard to pinpoint when these interactions are going to happen. But maybe a more simple study would be to have a bunch of people look up in the sky and just, for a couple hours, see if they come across UFOs. This is where I bring it back to Bill Nelson, the NASA director, who talked about saying that there's these things that we can't explain. And I start going, either that's a pool for funding, or you just told a person that UFOs exist and you tell him to look through a micro or a telescope for a couple months straight with no breaks. Next thing you know, you have this person going, I saw it. Well, did you, or you're wanting to see something? I've seen, me and Massimo have talked about seeing a dot in the sky that moves around really, really fast, and we don't know what that is. Is it a UFO? Maybe not, but I mean, I'm not going to toss out the opinion of it, but I am wanting to see one if I'm looking up at the sky, not blinking for 10 hours. Like, I mean, I'm just bringing these up.
Yeah, I'd like to just point out, I'd like the observables that you're describing, the consistency over time is something that I had no idea about before I started actually studying this topic. And I only started studying this topic quite recently. Historically, I have been a skeptic, not a debunker, but I just didn't put in any effort on the subject. I sort of went with the flow of modern culture telling me that it's just a bunch of people seeing things that look like machines in the sky. But when I started looking into it, and it was due to President Obama talking about it, and there are a variety of reasons why that might be, that's what triggered my interest. But that made me think, why would the president be encouraging people to think about this subject? That goes completely against the historic grain. Now, if you look at the data, you can see that going back to the 40s in some FBI files, the described features of what people are seeing are consistent. It's light phenomena that describe the colors, the instantaneous acceleration with no sound, all those things like that. And then I'm looking at the historic records, and we have a variety of very prestigious people. Sir Arthur C. Clarke in 1959 wrote an essay saying that the features of these objects are consistent with ball lightning. The hardcore unexplained UFOs may be plasmoids, ball lightning. And so in the 50s, they were coming to this conclusion based on these observables. Dr. Hynek in 1972, after looking at UFO files for quite some time for the United States Air Force, wrote his book, and he described what people consistently were observing in the hard to resolve cases. And it was once again like luminous phenomena. He says specifically the light is more significant than the object it is presumably attached to. He says the UFO may be nothing more than the light. He describes how some of them are remarkably small. He describes how they seem to hug the ground. And then we get, we can go into Foo Fighters and things like that. And Dr. Teodorani's work, this is where I have a scientific mind. My background is analytic philosophy, and then I went to law school briefly. But the Dr. Teodorani's work really spoke to me because I was looking for actual data, somebody taking it seriously quantitatively. Dr. Hynek went to Hesdalen in 1982, a year before he died, or maybe it was 1983, but he went there because he saw it as he said himself, UFO laboratory. There are things happening here, so the phenomenon can be studied. He recognized that these things were consistent over time. And so when Dr. Teodorani applies the scientific method to it, and he is so clear about how some things are speculation, other things are pure quantitative observation. And despite me having no history of interest in the paranormal, not looking down on it, but just having no active interest, that is what speaks to me. And I'm fascinated now by the modern dynamic where the only thing that people who say they care most about this subject do not look at this data. And when I try to engage with them, they will not talk to me about it. And the same goes with skeptics, where I'm try to talk to them about UFOs, the data, and they literally will not speak to me about it. Like Mick West, I shared a review paper from 2016 published in the Journal of Solar and Terrestrial Physics. It's a peer-reviewed journal, and it talks about Dr. Teodorani's work. Mick West's response to me was, the scientists did not see what they say they saw. And he's like the leading debunker / skeptic on the subject. That just surprised me. Dr. Teodorani, maybe would you be able to comment on the interaction between the UFO believers and the skeptics and the impact that your work has had on the way that you experience their perceptions of your work? My experience, very briefly, in such a lesser way, has been it's like almost like an uncanny valley between these two things getting squeezed out. Nobody wants to engage with it because it conflicts with the skeptic view, UFOs are not real, the believer view, oh, they're aliens. Nobody wants to touch this stuff, and yet it's the best data I can find on the subject. How have you experienced that?
Oh, yeah. Good question. Well, I did experience this, and I felt like to walk between two fires. Okay, two fires constantly. Okay, from one side, which I consider more dangerous, and in my opinion, some believers are more dangerous than the hyper skeptical or something. They tend to exploit every claim that we do, especially if you are a scientist. They decontextualize some sentences out of a writing, out of a paper or a discourse, and they change completely, letting people think that you have said that, but you didn't say that. The point is that they want to use scientist vision to say, oh, you see, we already told this, and he is saying the same. No, I'm not saying the same. There was a guy, for instance, in Hesdalen. We had, then I speak also about the skeptical side. I know no tolerance for neither of the two. I have to tell, well, something strange happened in Hesdalen in the year 2000, in summer, August 2000. It was the first official mission to Hesdalen with our instruments. And yes, we had, but unfortunately we couldn't photograph or do anything at that moment because it was too fast. There was a triangular object in the sky with 3 lights to the vertices, which was coming towards us on the field in Aspaskjolen, and stopped over us for 15 seconds, rotated, and disappeared. Not went away, just disappeared, vanished. Okay, this was something, we saw it, we were 5. We saw it from different directions. Clearly, it was not the NOS satellite constellation, because it was, you could see that all the 3 lights were rotating, and you could see in the residual light of the Nordic night, there was a sort of dark gray fuselage there. I could see with my binocular, okay? So something completely structured. I don't know what was the relation between this thing, very silent, by the way, and those plasma lights, okay? So this was an event. After 3 days, no, 2 days, there was a little light, which was something like a plasma light, but it was elliptical. I could measure it very well. In this case, I took also a photo. It was 2 feet in diameter, a very low level of light, and it was standing in front of us 90 meters, I would say 250 feet away from us at human height, 6 feet, standing still for 10 minutes. And then we went away because my colleague was a bit worried. I tried to approach it because I wanted to take a good photo. The photo is not bad, but was not very ideal. And then we went away. So we have 2 events. Now I am coming to the believers. One triangular thing that we saw, and one plasma-like light, little light, standing still for 10 minutes, okay, and nothing else. 2 months later, there was a UFO Congress in which a guy completely transformed the story and told that the triangular, let's call it craft, landed on the field and tried to abduct us. You see how people is changing completely the story. Sometimes I think that among these so-called believers, not all believers are so, some are good persons, some are. Some of the believers work for someone, and their goal is to try to discredit our work. And so they invent, literally, ex abrupto, a totally false story. And this happened. So this is only an example of the so-called believers. I say, I repeat, not all believers are so. There are some ufological researchers who believe in the ETH, but they're not bad. They're behaving correctly, okay? But some of them are not. I go to the other side, the so-called skepticals. They simply deny, okay? I went to some conference where there were some of them, of the Italian psychop, CSI now in America. And they were doubting since the very beginning that this phenomenon exists. So they don't say it's a natural phenomenon, it's a man-made artifact. They simply say it doesn't exist. So it is illusion. They automatically refuse to examine the facts. And this behavior is anti-scientific, completely, totally anti-scientific, not only, but the behavior of some of them is so dangerous that they can block the advancement of science, because they attack not only people who study UFOs scientifically, but they also attack scientists that propose alternative theories that are self-consistent, they attack also them. And in many cases, these skeptical people have not, in most cases, they have not the scientific competencies to judge, okay? But they want to judge, okay? So this is dangerous. I've been walking between two fires. I am friend with some skepticals, yes. I was friend with the two big scientists, Professor Tullio Regge and others, who are seriously skeptical, okay, because they are scientists. But some of these people use science not like a methodology, but like a belief system, like a new God, okay? So this is not rational, not scientific, and I cannot appreciate. If I have to choose between the two, well, I feel more close to the skepticals than to the others, but they try to avoid both of them.
Well, I can't speak from working with them, but I can speak from talking with them. I've had some of the top people of the Skeptic Society on my show, Michael Shermer being one, Mick West being another. And I've had the people that believe as far as you can believe, time machines, time travel. I've also spoken with scientists who talk about the limitless power and understanding of dark matter compared to the multiverse theory. I've talked to a lot of people and gotten a base understanding that if you're like, the one thing I criticized about the Galileo project that I really didn't like was I didn't see any beneficial conversations. I'm sure there were some that were being had between a very small portion of them, but speaking with Nick Pope and Michael Shermer, none of these people want to back down from their opinions or their sides or what they have built in their head, and any information is going to be completely in one ear and out the other. Where I go, how do you expect science to excel if you're not letting it grow by conversating and talking about a matter or discussing all open scenarios, all possibilities?
I have to tell, it's very important. With all my respect for Michael Shermer in particular, but also Nick Pope on the opposite side, they do. Yes, they are some like consultants, advisors inside the Galileo project, but they don't represent the Galileo project. They are just advisors. People who are really doing Galileo project are engineers, who are those who are working more, and physical scientists, including me. We are discussing all the time. We are having meetings, general meetings every week, and specific meetings every week. We speak all the time and we discuss all the time. And I can assure you that it's just the opposite than belief system, because there are people who don't agree at all. They don't even believe that UFO exists. So we discuss all the time what we are. The thing that puts us in common is the will to create a technological system that helps us to take good data. This is the only thing that we want. Whatever the data are, clearly. I don't believe in anything, okay? I'm fascinated by the idea of another intelligence, other dimension, even that, why not? But what is interesting is only now the data. And thanks to the sensitivity of the sensors that will be used very soon, and to artificial intelligent machine learning that is used in the software that will be able to recognize and identify the things, we will have good data. We will know whatever they are. Could be that UFOs do not exist. It could be that it's a kind of strange, never discovered before kind of mirage or something that comes from our consciousness, or even something paranormal. It could be that. Or it could be another kind of ball lightning, because you were mentioning before something about light. The light is most important than the shape. The point is that we have inside our mind a lot of mental categories of the collective imaginary. We have the idea of the flying saucer in our mind, okay, through the movies, and as soon as we see a light in the sky, our mind reconstruct all that thing in something else. But are we sure that what witness are seeing is what is really there? That's the reason why we want to use instruments, okay, like it was done in Esdalen. And in fact, what has been monitored by scientists so far, the few data that we have so far, is that almost never we have photos of cigars, flying saucer, triangles, or something else. And if there are triangles, I agree with some skepticals telling, wait, you have to check because the shutter of some cameras are triangular. So the photo of a light that is spherical becomes triangular because the shutter is closed and it gives a triangular shape, okay? But it's not real triangle. So the problem is that we cannot believe, we have to study very deeply the witness, because the witness is probably the most important biosensor that we have. But at the same time, we cannot record the data, but we have to study it. But we have to be aware of the fact that what people is seeing is probably not what really happens outside. There is another important factor. Electromagnetic interference is something that is very well documented. There is a very important paper by Dr. Mark Rodegear, which I have to praise because it speaks about electromagnetic interference. Electromagnetic interference can do several things to the instruments. I am a witness. When I was in the Arizona desert of instruments that all of a sudden were off, totally off. Batteries that were completely new, charge gone, complete. So if there is any electromagnetic interference with instruments from an electromagnetic source, necessarily the same interference must happen with our brain. And we know, especially from the experiments by Dr. Michael Persinger in Canada, that our brain, if it is subject to some kind of strong magnetic fields or frequencies like very long wavelength, like ELF radiation, it can cause hallucination. So if there is a light bulb that is real and that is creating this electromagnetic field, and this is very, very probable, it has been also measured sometimes, I expect that its electromagnetic field affect very seriously the human brain, so that we don't see the light bulb, but we see a spacecraft. But this is an hallucination. It could be. This is an hypothesis. That's the reason we are using instruments and see what the instruments are seeing 24 hours a day. If instruments, this is my opinion, will see nothing in 1 year, monitoring from 24 hours a day in several spots of the Earth without the presence of a witness, then I would say, well, then you need a witness to have a UFO, okay? But if it is so, then it's a paranormal phenomenon, which is triggered by the witness, by himself. So we have to be prepared also to things that is very exotic. What is important is that this thing can be measured, okay? So far we can speculate. We're allowed to do that.
Yeah. Well, I'm comforted to know that Michael Shermer and Nick Pope aren't the only people that are kind of involved in the Galileo project, but they're the ones that people come in contact with on Twitter and social media. And this is where I bring up the aspect of, I don't know if someone's trying to sell a book or not, which really belittles the data. I would say there's people that have certain experiences that you need to find out are true or not, but there's people that have an event in their life or a certain path in their life, whether it's skeptic or skeptical, where they die on their position. Basically, they don't ever back down from it. They don't let anybody talk to them. They dismiss anybody that might have a different siding view of it, which doesn't just destroy discourse, but it's also hard to tell if this person's just not doing it for money. Nick Pope always featured on Ancient Aliens. Now, I love Nick Pope, he's a good guy, but to say that you're not in it just for the publicity aspect of it, like, it starts to really belittle the actual scientists who are working behind the scenes. Now, my whole diatribe for that is, I don't want it to end up like the Robertson panel, where you had scientists being lumped in with where people think of the UFO topic now, much like they thought of back then, as being crazy. Even though the government's talking about it now, the topic is still heavily stigmatized with this person might wear a tinfoil hat. So when you get into that aspect, imagine being a scientist that wants to know what these things are, but doesn't want to come out and say that they're involved in this type of research, because they'll be labeled as one of these tinfoil hats, even though that they're not. Where I bring up the question in this kind of preface for this, there's a thing called the Nano Shield. It's a certain organization that talks about using nanotechnology in our atmosphere, much like how our ozone layer is, but putting nanotechnology up there. Now, it's not something that's going to stay up there permanently. It's more an idea of planetary defense in some aspects, but I wonder if you could use these monitoring systems to be able to take samples or data chunks that we could use to better estimate if this is a weather phenomena, if it is some type of occurrence. Because you have to think, I mean, at times I think we're all just high. I hate to say it, but with all the ozone pollution, all the heat that's been cranking pretty hot in the past couple of months, I start wondering, what's that doing to our brains? Like, it's cooking it like an egg on a driveway. And I don't know if people are that's messing with people's manipulation of how they see things. But when we talk about devices that are picking up certain occurrences, and we can talk about a camera shutter, we can talk about this, these are all really good points as well too. But what about, like, when we see jet fighters that are picking up stuff on military technology? I start to question, is this an anomaly that we haven't, maybe an electromagnetic frequency that we haven't come in contact with before? Is this something that our systems all are seeing the same exact thing? I mean, these are points that UFO people are going to bring up, where I just go, if we can get there, if we can get to this aspect that we all agree that there's something, whether it's weather phenomena, aliens, and all this, that we can't understand, then why don't we join up on that aspect of the thing that we don't understand and want to pursue what that is? Would you belittle someone for wanting to explore the consciousness? No. Then why would you belittle someone for wanting to explore if it's a weather phenomena? Like, there's these, you start to realize people are confined to their ideology because it's become a part of them. And it's something I've noticed in the UFO community that's kind of scared me a little bit, is that if you even bring up a point that might be against their opinion or against their perspective, just an outside voice, it's seen as a personal attack. And you see that in politics today. And I don't think that should be with any type of topic, especially one that is an unknown one like this one is and has been for a very long time. Now, I give weight to the amount of technological advancement to be able to decipher what these things are now, but you still have the same exact bickering and fighting as you did 50 years ago. There's not a progression going forward, which in my opinion belittles the people who are actually trying to decipher whether it's this or that or this or that. And you're not giving them the opportunity to try out their methods because you still have the one track mind.
Well, this is something I've been actually writing on right now. I have a piece I'm working on, and this is I'd love to hear your perspective, Dr. Teodorani. It's exactly what you're saying right now, Robbie, that there's a lot of agreement in principle between various people on this subject, but then when they're actually talking, there's a lot of defensiveness and aggression. The Black Triangles and Nick Pope are a pretty good example of that. I have an extensive list of skeptics and pro UFO people who all have at one time or another suggested that they support a ball lightning interpretation of the UFO phenomenon. That includes Mick West. On your show, Robbie, he talks about that. Jason Colavito is a prominent skeptic. Neil deGrasse Tyson has advocated for the ball lightning. And then Nick Pope, as well as Dr. Eric Davis, wrote a secret report for the U.S. Air Force in 2003. It's been declassified in 2009 through Freedom of Information access request by John Greenwald of the Black Vault. He says that UFOs throughout history, they cause victims and stuff, and that they are ball lightning. And he describes a variety of mechanisms, and he talks about his work with Hal Puthoff and researchers Coram and Coram, and he references personal communications, and then they're involved in the Sapphire Project, which is their attempt to commercialize ball lightning type energy. So there are things going on here. Now, Nick Pope and the Black Triangles, and then I'd love to hear Dr. Teodorani's perspective. Nick Pope has written in 2000, he worked for the United Kingdom Ministry of Defense in the 90s. He worked at the UFO desk that did public relations. He did some internal stuff as well. He describes himself as a UFO investigator, but there's no evidence that he actively investigated anything. It's sort of semantics. But he, in 2016, for BBC Future, wrote an extensive feature where he talks about conspiracy theorists may be correct, but not for the reasons they think. And he says, this is the ultimate dirty secret about UFOs. What we are dealing with may be a novel, exotic atmospheric phenomenon that is being kept secret, its knowledge of it, because the government is trying to militarize it. Now, what's he talking about there? He's talking about the United Kingdom's Ministry of Defense UAP in the UK Air Defense Region report that was written from 1997 to 2000, written in secret. And it was a very secretive document. They denied that it existed to the elected officials responsible for Ministry of Defense oversight. Only 11 copies were produced. They were only circulated to the very top. We know, because of this report, it's publicly available in the UK National Archives, that the top leadership in the UK was briefed that UFOs are real and that they are a kind of ball lightning phenomenon that is not yet well understood, but it should be kept secret because they are trying to militarize various applications of the possible plasma-related technology. We can argue about whether they were wrong in their analysis, but there is no question on the public record that the United Kingdom Ministry of Defense's top leadership has been briefed that UFOs are real. This report specifically says that UAP exists is indisputable. And they aren't saying that in the way that skeptics say it, like, oh, I saw a UAP on the way to work. I got closer and it turns out it was a seagull. Haha. This is them in the next sentence. They say, credited with the ability to hover, take off, land, accelerate to exceptional velocities, and vanish. They can alter their trajectory suddenly and can outmaneuver any known aircraft or vehicle, manned or unmanned. They also say black triangles are real. And what they say is that they are 3 ball lightning-like phenomena that are electromagnetically coupled together. Electromagnetic coupling is a well-known thing. This exact thing has not been proven, but their top leadership in the UK MOD has been briefed that black triangles are real. And they say that 3 ball lightnings become to get joined, and then a field occurs between them that produces a light scattering effect that produces the impression of a solid object. So Dr. Teodorani, I'd love to hear your perspective on that thing after Robbie, you said something.
I just got one real quick point. People said technology couldn't do things like this. I'm just saying nobody thought hypersonic missiles could do what they do. So I'm just tossing that out there.
Yes. Oh, it's very interesting. By the way, regarding what you were speaking about, the British report, I guess it's the Conding report, because I think I've been reading about what you say, and it's very interesting. They stress very much the plasma theory. And this is very interesting because it reminds me interpretative work that I've been doing for some months with a German researcher whose name is Henning Kirsten, who investigated the case of an accident with dead people in Russia at the Dyatlov Pass in 1959, where a group of trekkers all of a sudden were found dead. And what they found in their body was that it was something like burning, electrocuting, and they also found some photos in the film of something like a ball lightning. Okay, in the same area, more or less in the Ural Mountains, some strange phenomena were seen of light balls which were emitting beams of light, similar to lasers or something like that. So I've been thinking, how can a plasma do that? Well, what are the parameters of a ball lightning, for instance? First of all, a strong magnetic field, collapse of the plasma, and when there is a collapse, you have an increase of the magnetic field due to the conservation of the magnetic flux. You have an increase of rotation of the plasma due to conservation of angular momentum. At some point, the ball becomes a flattened disk with the hole in the poles. The poles look like, how to say, liberation of energy. From the pole, you can have beams in the same way in which pulsars, neutron stars that are pulsing, are emitting radiation, the same mechanism. And sometimes I think that the universe is a kind of self-similar, that also on the little scale, in particular situation, plasma light are triggered by something that we don't know, and that produce things that apparently look like technological, but they are not technological. The idea, like you said, about the three lights that are electrostatically linked, it's very possible, absolutely. The idea that they make a perfect equilateral triangle is not very probable, but it's very possible. I've seen several movies, films of more than three lights altogether, like clusters, like they call them flotilla in Mexico or so. It looks like very much a natural phenomenon. It looks like not an intelligent behavior. They move only randomly, most of the time, and they behave exactly like fireflies. Random movement. It doesn't look intelligent, at least that kind of phenomenon. So I believe that there is a component that is natural, that is very important, and that must be understood, because if we know how to confine the plasma through a strong magnetic field, this would help us in our tokamak for nuclear fusion, for instance. We would learn from nature. We should have to understand what triggers this process, where you have a central force that attracts plasma, heats it up, and increase rotation, increase magnetic field. It's very important. And I come to your other point, weapons. In the past, I had a devilish moment, because I am a bit mad in the sense that I'm quite an expert in weapon systems. And my master thesis, not the PhD, but master thesis was about explosion, about the effect of a shock wave, studying the nuclear explosion of Alamogordo, and see what the shock wave, a blast wave, produces in the environment. I needed that to use a mathematical technique that is able to simulate a supernova explosion in this case. Well, I come to the point. What happens if instead of using TNT or something or whatever, you find out a way to produce a huge magnetic field that is collapsing, imploding a plasma, and then you release the all of a sudden magnetic field, you put it to zero, you would have a huge explosion. Imagine 20 millimeter or 30 millimeter shells. You can imagine what the result. Okay, you could make normally you make a hole that is so far with a 20 millimeter normal, but with that system, I did some calculation, you can make a hole that is 1 meter. Okay, so it's possible to make tremendous weapons, plasma weapons, if you are able to collapse a plasma through a strong sudden magnetic field and then release it away. You can create very powerful weapons that can create big destruction. Both this and electromagnetic pulses that are used electromagnetically in war. So I understand if some military wanted to cover up this, because it's quite a dangerous thing, absolutely. But we have to study it.
Oh, yeah, I thought you said you had some questions, Robbie, because we're going to wrap up soon. Is that right?
Huh?
Did you mention that you had some questions you were going to ask before?
Oh, I mean, I didn't know if you had anything left in the tank before I started firing off some more.
Okay, I could just say one very brief thing, and then we'll move on. Yeah, I think that the historic documents that are formally declassified through Freedom of Information access are very good for informing opinion on this. It's not scientific, and there could be misinformation in there. But if you look exclusively or majority at internal communications, these are the things where institutions are transmitting ideas and information inside themselves. The UAP and the UK Air Defence Report, Project Condign, is an internal report to the top leadership to fully inform them to the best of the abilities of the analyst what's going on. So I don't know if that report's true or not, but the fact that people interested in the UFO conversation, the fact that that's not the main thing being discussed, the fact that the top levels of UK Ministry of Defense leadership have been briefed that UFOs are real and the black triangles are real, that should be the number one subject of discussion, I think, because everybody suggests that it's absurd for it to be a conspiracy and things like that in the mainstream. I'm not conspiracy minded, but the document is the document, and that's something interesting. They could be wrong in their assessment, but we know that the government thinks UFOs are real in that case. In the Robertson report, like you mentioned, Robbie, the CIA didn't actually discredit UFOs. They said that Foo Fighters were real. From their assessment, they said that they believed that they were electromagnetic or electrostatic in nature. And then they say if UFO or if flying saucer was a term in the World War II, Foo Fighters would have been called flying saucers. And then they go on to talk about ball lightning inside the CIA report and their previous CIA memos talking about how they think they're electrostatic. So there are internal communications that it's almost like in the religious community, so many who say that they believe the Bible is the true word of God. And you try to talk to them about the actual contents of the Bible, and they have never read the book. And it just blows my mind. And I can't understand that.
Well, the amount of, I had an expert on here to talk about the biblical realizations that really are in the Bible, like a giant flood, and how there's many societies that have gone through floods and they're all predicting basically the same flood, but everyone considers it just one when it's actually more than one. It's multiple. I mean, when we talk about government documents, you got to understand, I'm in the whole anti-government type deal, mostly because they don't have to tell you jack. You do a Freedom of Information Act and you're supposed to get real documents about secret government stuff because you played guess who? I go, would it make more sense to say, here's an official document released to my superiors, and you just make a fake document? I mean, if we talk about the biggest example of that, I'm sure he's not a bad guy. He's made some great music, but Tom DeLonge. The man's talks about being an FBI informant. I go, if I was the FBI and I wanted to get the public to stop snooping in on my business, I would give this guy and sit him down in a room in interrogation style and tell him a bunch of government stuff and have him go out and tell the world. Now, is it a sense of getting the world ready for UFOs? But the guy's talking about a lot of stuff like, I can't talk about this, I can't talk about that. You went on a podcast and a television knowing they're going to ask you these questions, and you're telling me that you weren't prepared for them to be asked? I'm going to pry into, what do you know? And then you say, I can't really confirm anything. I don't believe you now. I don't trust you. I don't think anything that you have is real. Now, who I do respect and who I do accept are scientists like Massimo, that when that whole entire time he's explaining me this I can't even say the word, it's too many, but when he's explaining everything, he's not saying that it's 100% this or it's 100% that. He's just explaining what happens and then how lights can shoot off. And anybody else would be like, and that's how you know it's this. I never heard that once from him. That's why you can take what he says as unbiased data or unbiased information in a point of whether just wanting to know what it is. Now, I've talked to plenty of other scientists who have the same type of view. Now, they do skepticize on the alien aspect, and I will too. I like to talk about, I would love to know if there was extraterrestrials out there. But I deem the question when we have the conversation is, if we can't have the conversation and you dismiss my opinion, do you really consider me your equal? And I think you come across a lot of that, a lot of people getting their own motives across and things of that sort through the UFO Twitter, through anything. And I don't see the government doing anything really different. I feel like the government's getting its own aspect up there when it comes to, maybe they have technology that they're showing off, or maybe they haven't told a bunch of people about. But I also bring in the aspect, if this is aliens, if this is a real occurrence, if this is something, what are your steps to be able to understand what it is? How do you, if this is only going to accelerate? I mean, from the Manhattan Project, you see more alien occurrences happen, or more sightings of them. But also, I can't get out of the realm of, you now have entered a topic, which the UFO topic is, much like other topics like JFK. It is everywhere you step is a data pile. And is that data pile accurate? Maybe. I don't know. We're looking at documents from 50 and 40 years ago. Do you trust their words for it? I don't. So you land in this realm of what can we trust? What can we do? And if you're telling me that there's people like Massimo that are giving out good scientific experiments or studies that we could be doing to decipher about what this thing is, whether it's like a random chance that in this specific area it's going to hit, you have satellites you can hook lasers up to. You have other things that you can fly up in the air to hook lasers up to be able to figure out and just have it fly around and do a roaming thing. But that's not being pushed towards. I start to go, I'm really, really thinking that they're pushing a narrative in a sense.
Yes, I don't exclude the ETH hypothesis, a so-called alien hypothesis. I cannot. It would be dishonest from me to exclude a priori something. But so far, all what I've been reading about that is not convincing. Sometimes it's very ridiculous. And I see that it seems that Earth has been visited by a zillion kind of alien races. How many alien races have been visited? Where are we the center
We're
of
like
the
the Caribbean.
multiverse?
We're like the
Yeah,
Caribbean.
exactly. Are we the center of the multiverse or something like that? There is something that doesn't convince me. But looking at some behavior of the phenomenon, sometimes I think there is indeed one form of intelligence behind. I might agree with the theory of Dr. Jacques Vallée regarding some kind of intelligence that is abstract, that is stimulating our evolution, and also sending symbolic images to trigger our mind. I can understand that. I can accept that. I have been working on SETI. I published articles that are SETI or SETI related with peer review, the last ones on Acta Astronautica. But due to several reasons, I am not able to see a continuum between the possibility of technosignature on other stars or inside the solar system, like Oumuamua, for instance, and what we are seeing in our atmosphere. In few words, I am not anymore able to hypothesize the possibility that UFOs or UAPs are just airplane of carriers that have been reaching the solar system, that are seeding these, let's say, tadpoles, like a frog is seeding tadpoles towards Earth. I'm not able to think about that because what I see is absolutely impossible. The physics that we experience on this planet is the same physics that everyone else experience 13 billion light years away. It's the same, except for the new central black holes of galaxies, of course, but in normal world, the physics is the same. So I expect that they have evolved technologically with the same physics, doing probably more than we do, maybe opening portals with using negative energy to open portals and warp drive, all that thing. But I cannot think that the idea of a pilot that is sitting on an object that is flying at 50,000 kilometers per hour and then making right angle turns without dying. Everyone inside would be obliterated, and even the machine itself would be completely destroyed. So it looks like something more, how to say, ethereal, or something like energetic than really solid. Okay, there are some kind of plasmas, because plasmas are not only luminous in they can be cold plasma, not only necessarily 5,000 Kelvin degrees, they could be 300 Kelvin degrees. Okay, they could be dark. I've been speaking with Japanese researchers just in Stalin at the Bologna conference. They told, yes, there is a possibility of dark plasmas. So also black things in the sky could be plasmas in reality, low energy plasmas. So I have no answer. I don't reject any possibility. Mm-hmm. I believe the phenomenon is real. I've seen with my own eyes, but I suspend any judgment. I have no belief system. I only want to see good data and nothing else.
Can I raise the question to you of, do you think it might be because everyone's cognitive capacity is different? Now we have cognitive abilities of understanding that are different than my ability to retain information might be different from Campbell's, might be different from yours. But if we talk about the base layer of the brain, I think weighs 1,350, around that. There are some abnormalities where people might have a little bit lower and a little bit higher. And it's not like abnormality like 1 in a billion. It's like more common than you would think. Much like our perceptions of what we think our basis could be based on our morals and values. I start to wonder, you have a bunch of people that might think this thing or might think this thing. Is it possible that they might be seeing, like, besides the collaborative or the group think, I would say, when it comes to all experiencing the same exact thing in the sky, 100 people will say they see the same exact thing in the sky. But the people that bring up the accounts that they were in the same spot but saw something completely different, where I start wondering, is it maybe an effect that our way that our maybe mental goes in with some certain phenomena that's happening in that area, not necessarily aliens, but some type of magnetic or electronic thing. I mean, because our brains are like frequencies. I mean, I bring up radio. There's a thing called radio phenomena. I think it's phenomena. But when I worked at a hotel for so long, I had a radio always on my hip. And when I would take it off and go home, after a couple of years of working there, I would hear my name being called through a radio when I was not at work. It was just soaked into my brain. And I start going, your brain is kind of like a radio knob, and it links to the telepathy thing that you're talking about. Now, I do dive into the psychic rabbit hole. I do dive into the paranormal type stuff because it's fun to learn about. It's fun to talk about too. But if we talk about like the idea of when I think about something, I'm thinking about Campbell, and then Campbell randomly sends me a text. Oh, hey man, how's it going? I was like, I was just thinking about you. If we take the brain being on a different frequency, like a radio channel 1, 2, and 3, let's say that people are on different frequencies, or maybe more sensitive is the word that scientifically we could say for it. You're more sensitive to your environment. Maybe you're more sensitive to the amount of radiation exposure that you're being given to. I mean, there's a bunch of solar flares that happened in Arizona in, I think it was like 8, 9 months ago. And we just acted like it just went away. I start going, do you ever think that some of the particles didn't dissipate like they were supposed to, and they might be lingering around in some certain areas? It goes back to when me and you were talking about, Massimo, when I mentioned my lawnmower and gas fumes. When I would stop my lawnmower after using a whole, whatever, couple hours of riding it, the gas fumes from the lawnmower made the ground warp, made it seem like this type of thing. And I start going, I mean, we talk about climate change, we talk about these types of things. Is it possible that it's not fading away as well as we might think. And you're starting to see the buildup of it, where in certain areas, in certain spots, and depending on how exhausted someone might be, some other brain factors as well too, they're perceiving something that isn't there. It's a mirage aspect. Now that plasma, that different type of plasma, I will give weight to, of different types of plasma causing different types of occurrences. But imagine if it's the same plasma, maybe a couple molecules different, but our brain just perceives it in a whole different way. It's something that we can see, in a bunch of people could see, and we could have the same experience but see multiple things. And then what you really have to now decipher and draw the line into is when you have people that talk about being abducted and being sent into this. Now I start to question, did that happen, or are you now adding memories to a memory that is actually true, but you're adding details to it that did not happen? And you start to get into the point of people taking offense of lying, where I just bring up the question, when you see Travis Walton with his experience of being in the woods and a giant blue beam come down and suck him up, and he feels like time goes away, you land in this area of, did you just pass out after experiencing a weather phenomena because your brain could not handle the information that it was consuming? I think I have to give a lot more weight to now, from the people I've talked to who've talked about a lot of ozone issues and frequency issues that come in with radiation, just from diving into space a little bit more, where you might be experiencing a little bit of, I wouldn't say radiation poisoning, but I also think there hasn't been a lot of focus in the general public's idea of how much radiation from our devices, all these things that we're constantly holding up to our heads, that don't play a little bit of an effect. It's like having a Bluetooth in your head. Eventually you take it out, you start hearing voices in your head that aren't necessarily there.
But well, it's a bit like the 5G thing issue. It's in reality, I am not expert in electronics, but I know that the last generation of cell phones and computers are very well screened by this kind of radiation, and I don't think that they are able to trigger some kind of hallucination unless you are keeping the phone constantly on the ear. In that case, you get microwaves in a continuative way. But if the phone is 1 meter away or even some centimeters away, I don't think that the new technology can create this kind of hallucination. I think it's more, and as well as, how to say, electric poles. I did my self-measurement. I was in Canada, near Toronto at Ajax. By the way, my wife is Canadian, and studies UFOs as well, but in a different, from a different discipline. I was there close to a nuclear plant of Pickering, I think it was, yes. And I took measurement with a tri-field EM meter, and I noticed that it was something like 6,000 volt. Okay, so it started to make effect only something like 60 meters. After 60 meters, it makes nothing. So there is a lot of new age movement telling, oh, they are polluting us. They are not polluting. You need to be very close to be affected by them. Because I measured before, after 100 meters, 70 meters, there was no reading on the electric field. There was a huge reading when I was quite close, 10 meters or something, yes, but you should have the house just attached to the pole. I think it's more, but the idea of electromagnetic influence is important, as you said, but I think it's more important what is coming from the ground, which is probably related to piezoelectricity, which could create this kind of light balls, by the way.
Wait, could a disturbance in our tectonic plate do something like that? I had a guy who studies the Earth's core, the actual core part
Yeah,
to it, and he
I
talked to,
think
yeah.
I think it's important because they have measured a lot of radio waves in all frequencies from VHF, UHF, ELF, VLF, all frequencies. So they can affect the brain, in particular ELF, so very long wavelength, and microwave. They can trigger hallucination. You can also, when there is nothing, you see something, or there can be something like a plasma ball which emits this field, and it can let you see things that are not there. So there is something. At the end, ultimate reality is a plasma ball.
Well,
this we know.
It's like binoculars. You can see farther with binoculars. It doesn't do anything to your eyes normally, but it just makes you, it helps assist you in seeing distance. When I was talking to someone who studies ancient microbials on the ocean seafloor, he talked about how there's these rifts and they look like giant craters that go down into the core or something like that. They don't really, but what is interesting is that you wouldn't see anything with your normal eyes, but if you took a camera and you had a certain thermal layer get put onto it, you would see these things that look like ghosts flying out of the crack in the thing. And he talks about this is the type of electric thing that comes out of this certain area. And I mean, it's possible. I mean, there's tectonic plates are probably having some types of issues or some types of things that are going on. Anomalies or just weird waves that we might mess up our perception of things as well too.
It's important to study that. Guys, I'm so sorry, but I'm a bit late.
Well, Massimo, where can people find you, man? Where can people find you?
Oh, yeah. It's on my website is massimoteodorani.com. And there you can find my thoughts, my research, and also my music, because I'm an electronic musician. I play synthesizer in my free time. So I have that, massimoteodorani.com. There are several links. I'm sorry that I have to cut but I have something of the last hour that I have to, and I'm late a little.
It's been fantastic having the opportunity to speak with you.
I want to thank you very much for the very stimulating questions and reasonings, and thank you. It was very good for me.
And we're back. And then there was chill. What I wanted to learn more about is like, if we can check to see if this really is a weather phenomenon, could you just go to the moon, not even the moon, could you go to another planet that we have sent a drone to and just be able to hook up monitoring or something like that to be able to see if, is it just Earth that experiences these types of things? Why the hell? You can go to any planet. Why would you pick the one that's the most populated? Like, if you're going to go to another planet, you want to do something, or maybe do an observation from a distance rather than just go and, drop down for a second, do a couple loop-de-loops and fly up out of it. I mean, if you really look at the amount of information when we come to UFOs, I mean, there's a lot of sightings. There's a lot of, and it's the same camera one over and over and over again, the little black and gray, whatever thing. And you see this thermal thing of like it looks like a saucer. It's the common one they use for articles. Now I talked to Dave, I think his name's Betty, the guy from the Nimitz.
Oh yeah, Betty. Yeah.
He talked about that. He talked about like, there's explanations behind that as well too. And I mean, it's an interesting topic, I think, is the main importance of it. I think that the fact that the conversations now have leaked into more of the general public, and it seems like now that the government designed a task force for it, you're having a lot of people not really give a shit. I'm just saying, I haven't seen much from like common UFO people that I usually see.
Well, man, this is like we were talking about with Larry, this current government initiative, this process, it's extremely similar to the process in the 1960s. And we can look to the 1960s to infer what's happening now. In the 1960s, the United States Air Force commissioned the Condon Report through the University of Colorado. And it's now known through leaked documents that they communicated with the lead physicist, Dr. Condon, to ensure that the study would calm down the public perception. We also have declassified CIA memos from the 50s. And I agree with what you were saying before. Like, it's not science to read those memos, but they are internal, real communications. So they have some value from a historic perspective to contextualize things. And the CIA specifically identifies, we want to control this narrative. They talk about aiming to use entertainment companies. The Disney company is specifically mentioned. I cited exactly where it is in the documents on my website. So we know that the government has historically actively taken control of the narrative in order to protect national security interests. So it's not evil. It's not inherently good. It's not inherently bad. It's just, if they have an obligation to protect the nation state, there are things that through science, you can study psychology, influence, promotions, advertising. You can affect behavior through your own choices, like as a government entity, as a corporation. There's $100 billion in the United States alone, last I checked, a year spent on advertising. That's because these guys know it works, because the research is very strong on that subject.
I'd also knock out the possibility where I want to take a blood test of a large sample of people, because one thing I've learned about in trying to get neuroscientists and other people to discuss brain fog, especially brain fog after COVID, and the way I've been discussed to it is that when you can't smell for that long period of time, it's a sign of brain damage. To the extent of what that brain damage is, they don't know. Some people I know haven't had their smell in over 2 years. They smell one specific thing. They have to retrain their brain, which in a sense is being able to regenerate it. Brain tissue doesn't regenerate. From the science, there's new science out now about it too, talking about there's parts of the brain that can regenerate and parts that can't, but it's specifically difficult to varying depending on how much time it would take to do so. Positive, apparently, energy, like just being in a good environment, like we're talking about your environment affecting you, being in a good thing, having a positive reaction can actually stimulate parts of your brain to be able to help growth. But if we talk about brain fog, there's parts of, like, for me, I have brain fog. There are days I can't even, I feel like I'm high. And it hasn't gone away. It's been months. And you start realizing that an infection can literally alter your brain in such a sense that it's not as normal as it was before, as if it was ever normal. Where I wonder, why does no one question the fact that an infection can do that? A microbe or some type of thing in your body, something different, can alter your whole makeup in that sense. But we don't look at the possibility of radiation or electromagnetic frequencies or devices that we do use possibly adding some type of interference into the way our brain mechanisms move. I mean, I think that's a really important question that should be raised more. I think it should be talked about as well too. I tell you, when we talk about the area of consciousness, if you dive down that rabbit hole and you realize how much they don't know about fucking consciousness, you start understanding, oh my God, like there actually could be something that we're really distorting with our minds, and it could be something that needs something else. And that could be this plasma phenomena or this lightning ball phenomena that we are distorting to make it look like something, much like to see an image in a cloud, you need a cloud.
Yeah, there's something there that you are seeing. That's right, exactly. And that's an interesting part of this. A lot of, when I started speaking to believers / experiencers, people who have actually encountered or describe encountering these objects,
I seen it.
Yeah, exactly. The descriptions that are subjectively provided, in my view and in other people's views as well, are very similar to very strong hallucinogenic drugs. Now, when I talk to skeptics about that, a lot of, it's not surprising, a lot of skeptics are kind of more hard line, don't typically
look
have
up
a history.
Operation Midnight Climax, and then you will know, don't ever trust your government. The CIA was drugging people to do against the anti-hippie movement. They used that experiment, and it's like, dude, there's so much with like MK Ultra, all the real government documents that come out. You realize that the government they treated you like guinea pigs. I mean, there's not human rat. There's human experimentation. There's rat experimentation that still goes on today. Drugs, bro. We're all high.
Well, historically, when you look at it, in the 60s, Hal Puthoff, Dr. Puthoff, the physicist, he's got a very controversial past, but he was involved with the CIA in terms of these studies about paranormal phenomena, psychic phenomena. There are questions about the value of that work that he did. It hasn't been replicated successfully, and now what you see, though, is that he is heavily involved in ball lightning research. He's heavily involved in trying to commercialize energy production through ball lightning research. But he's one of the people, like with Dr. Eric Davis, who also is involved in this, that I mentioned briefly before. He's written a secret report for the United States Air Force Research Lab saying that UFO experiences in history are traceable to ball lightning, and he's involved in this project to commercialize the money from it. So what you see, there's this fascinating connection between people who are very deep into the physics side of studying UFOs from scientific perspectives, and then this whole thing around electromagnetism and plasma, and there are all kinds of beliefs about that. I mentioned to you briefly the other day, and this isn't something that I personally subscribe to, but it's something that's worth knowing about because it is relevant in this subject. It's the plasma cosmology argument. Now, this is an alternative to the Big Bang theory. It's an alternative to general relativity. The underlying mechanism, they believe, this is Hal Puthoff and stuff, and this is what they're trying to achieve through the Sapphire Project in part. They believe that everything, even though the math is the same, they think that everything is actually physically different from how we see it. In terms of everything originating from plasma being the dominant force in the universe, depending on who has this set of beliefs. Even gravity doesn't exist in this model because I'm not a physicist, but the equations that describe electromagnetism can produce an effect that is mathematically the same as gravity. So they have these arguments about all these things. Like I said, it's rejected by mainstream science. But the people who have been involved with UFOs for a long time on the physics side tend towards this alternative physics. And, we can't verify if it's correct or not, but it's sort of like what Dr. Teodorani was talking about, how the classic UFO shape, it's he would potentially, like as he said, he doesn't firmly assert things, but the spinning plasma, you create a disk, the spinning disk from UFOs. There are portholes around it. It's the electromagnetic coupling of the different plasmoids. The beam coming down and shining on someone, that would be like humans get struck by lightning. It's the electromagnetic connection. You get struck, right? It goes channels through your body. This object with a charge couples to you, and then the beam, the projection of energy, like a neutron star, hits you in the same. So observably, of course, it would look like a UFO. Now, if we take the UFO that we would say looks and behaves like a neutron star, there's no way for a neutron star to be forming and existing in Earth's atmosphere unless you subscribe to these alternative physics models, because it's just entirely inconsistent. But if we are observational, if UFOs turn out to be neutron star-like physical phenomena, like the UK Ministry of Defense report in some way suggests, they don't say the neutron star thing, but they suggest the electromagnetic phenomena, then we would have to throw out a lot of what we think we know about the universe. I don't think that that's accurate. It could be accurate if UFOs are proven to be these neutron star-like things. We're going to have a lot of thinking to do. What do you think of that?
The reason I give weight to any and all ideas on the conversation in any aspect of any conversation ever, what I would say, keeping an open mind on everything, as crazy as someone might saying the earth is flat, I give leniency to that as well too. The majority of the way that people consider the term science is the narrative that we all agree to go off of. The majority of people that agree that gravity does exist, but we also created the term gravity It might be something, but you're just putting a label on something. It's like saying, if I told you I drink Coke, but really I drink Pepsi. But if I say, no, it's a Coke, okay, you're going against what we can physically see, but also the company put a label on a can. You don't know what the hell's in it. So you start going into this aspect. Is it possible that maybe all the information that we've been going off of for years and years and years is possibly wrong and it could be something else? 100% could be possible.
That's
But
always been the
also,
case in history.
exactly. But also, if you talk about the amount of information that we have perceived up until this point where history changes and we go and realize everything is wrong, you start realizing everything that you have built has been built upon a false premise. And now everything that you have done creative wise after that false premise might have fueled all those creative ideas. So you start wondering what else would be destroyed. Now, element 115, that special element or whatever that Bob Lazar talked about, they have created that. They have talked about this. There is this element. Now, it has some very weird properties to it. Now, is it saying that Bob Lazar is right about everything? No, but it's also looking at the aspect of we're constantly discovering things that we never knew about and never knew even possibly existed. And if you're only going off the base premise that the earth is flat, then you'll never look anywhere else but everything that would boil into the opinion that the earth is flat. Now, I'm not saying that at all, but I think you have to understand the weight of the words that you say and the direction that you go, where I just ask people, just ask the question, just have the conversation about it. You're not going to hurt yourself. Now, it sucks if you have a conversation about something you 100% can agree with, like that I'm like a ghost or something. I mean,
Yeah.
it's going to go for a while. It's going to be a waste of time, but doesn't mean you need to dismiss the opinion of it. Just walk away from it. You get into this weird area where if you realize that everything that you've been going off of for the longest time has now been wrong, the example I would use is the fact of dark matter. Nobody knew this existed, and now they realize that it does exist, and it actually might be a causation for the start of the Big Bang, from what I've been told. Someone that programs a simulation that is trying to recreate how the universe came to be. You start coming into question with things of, is what I built up in my head as true as the world wants me to know, or the world is going off of? That's where you start seeing the deceit and lies between people and the government, people feeling like the information that they have is true, and what gets labeled as a conspiracy. In my opinion, nothing's a conspiracy. In my opinion, nothing is fact. And in my opinion, nothing is science. That's not ideologist or some type of existential opinion that I have. It's just from talking to so many people and realizing the perspectives that you see, you really come to the basis of what you think you know everything when you truly know nothing. And like I said, water's water to us. I'm not going to dismiss anybody that's not water, or that's not whatever, or you weren't drinking a giant ass glass of water during this podcast. I'm not going to say that that's not factual, but I'm also going to say that that's not fact. What we classify as terms, it makes it really hard as a society, but I think it also gives it appraisal to the fact that society has been off these basic functions for so long. We all agree that killing is wrong. Well, to someone else, they can't decipher that being wrong. You get into this area where it doesn't say that you have to live off your own reality, but it helps you understand somebody else's. Doesn't mean you need to fix theirs. But I think the connection starts with conversation, is when you can boil down your own perspective to understand somebody else's. It's not easy to do. I'm not a master at it at all. I actually need a lot of work in that area, but I don't dismiss anything on that basic premise. And I think that's a very important thing you have to walk in with life with. Now, if we boil it down to these other types of theories out there, one I do really enjoy is the multiverse theory. I think that's a good one. I'm trying to get people on the show to talk about it, but it's very secluded. And the reason why I prefaced that long rant a minute ago was because of this part. It's very secluded, and the people that are involved in it will not speak on a show about the topic because of how it's been stigmatized. You can't do that. It's the Robertson panel all over again. You end up having scientists that kill themselves because they're being associated as crazy nut jobs, even though they have a long list of work that is credible. You can't do that in a topic like this, especially as cool as aliens. If it is aliens, holy shit, dude. I got so many questions. One, any of them single. They got to look good, though. If they have like human form, that's fine. But I don't know.
Yeah,
Blue skin's a turn off.
That's a dangerous game, I think.
I'll stick my dick in anything.
Okay. Don't even know what to say with that.
Any hole's a goal. I'm kidding.
Oh, wow.
I'm
Okay.
kidding.
Okay. Well, so I think you touched on a very important point about perception. Originally, when gravity was being mathematically described, Johann Kepler started working out the fundamentals to the theory of gravity mathematically. He didn't know what gravity was. We still don't know exactly what gravity is. We don't have a mechanism to describe what's going on. There's a speculated particle called a graviton that transmits gravity that has not been demonstrated to exist yet. So we don't know exactly what's happening with gravity. But the important part is the math describes what happens. We can make predictions that are essentially 100% accurate based on this, just the mathematics. So when Kepler was first figuring out the mathematics, people were infuriated by it, involved with the church, because the existing worldview was angels push the celestial spheres around. So things are being pushed around physically, and that's back to Aristotelian physics, where everything is originally moved by something else. And the Christian church adopted Aristotelian physics because if you infer from that reasoning, you can infer back to a single original first mover, which they attribute to a god. Now, in modern cosmology, we would maybe say the first mover was the Big Bang, which could be, and I think probably was, a purely natural phenomenon. But so you have these Aristotelian arguments against the explanation mathematically for gravity because it does not require someone to push it. Now, can
you just imagine one thing? If the Big Bang was a miraculous event out of like a pure infinite possibilities, and you have to think, is this the best possible scenario or is this the worst?
or is it just random and somewhere in between?
Like if there's a better version of me out there in a multiverse somewhere where it's like, actually, you're the worst possible scenario. I'm like, fuck.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's fun stuff about sort of speculating on physics, because if the universe is infinite, then it is necessarily the case that there are an infinite number of yous that are identical or near identical. If it's infinite, everything that is possible.
Give me a bat.
Yeah, and that's like, Rick and Morty, the multiverse. Do you watch that?
Well, I did, yeah. But I relate it to the Doctor Strange one, where if you die, it's your dreams. So it's like if you dream, you dream in your multiverse experience. You dream as that multiverse self. So each dream is different because you're experiencing what that multiverse is.
Right. Okay. Wow. Yeah, I should watch that. But the worldview matters a lot, and that's the thing that you were talking about, and it's reinforced. Now, I just want to make a defense of science as a tool,
not real.
Well, actually, let me challenge that. So, in the 1600s, we started seeing they were called natural philosophers. Philosophy means love of knowledge. So it's people who were going out and trying to figure out what's actually going on. There wasn't a standard process to accurately make predictions at that point. So that's the scientific method developed from the best way to make accurate predictions about the future. And in the 1600s, these natural philosophers started getting together. So in the United Kingdom, at the time, England, the Royal Society was founded in the 1600s. And the motto that they adopted in the 1600s was, take nobody's word for it. And what that means is that you can't just listen to someone saying something. It has to be verifiable. And out of that National Academy of Science comes everything that we have today. And it's based entirely on the accuracy of the predictive power and the replicability of the claim. So Benjamin Franklin, when he first assessed that lightning, and this is a really interesting parallel to the modern UFO conversation, lightning is atmospheric plasma. People thought it was intelligent, right? It was God or the devil striking bell towers. In the Middle Ages, they used to ring bells in the tops of the bell towers during thunderstorms to scare away the devil. And they had to institute a ban on doing that because the number of bell ringers that got killed from being struck by lightning.
Jesus.
But so they attributed it. It's like, oh, it's the devil. Obviously, it's aiming exactly at a person. Of course, that's intelligent.
Well,
but
wait, hold on. What we know is that lightning strikes the tallest point. So if you're looking at the bell towers, could it also be sound? Could sound be emitting some type of?
Well, the bells themselves would be metal, so I imagine that would draw it heavily. And they also,
what the fuck? We say metal conducts electricity, but how many trees get struck on a daily basis? It's kind of like when we say fires happen. You know, I think it's the survey from 2001 to 2019 in California. Firefighters reported that most fires were created by men, and I don't think people really know that. So you get into this aspect of like, are we just basing a lot of evidence off of things, or have they been tested again with a newer form? We have a lot of technology now, which I decipher why we understand aliens as much as we do, or there's more sightings of it now because we have better methods or better means in some sense. But how many things are being tested again? Old methods. Like there's wives' tales out there that still work. Nobody even questions the fact the Farmer's Almanac back in the day was accurate as shit. And every weatherman today sucks.
Yeah, well, as a farmer, I have to say that the weather apps are definitely important, and I do rely on the radar and things like that, which itself is microwaves, electromagnetic. Just to finish what I was saying before, Benjamin Franklin figured out that lightning is the same effect as static electricity on Earth. You know, you take a piece of fabric and you can rub it against the metal, you can build a charge, you can get zapped by it. He speculated, oh, that looks like a big version of this tiny thing. And this is what Dr. Teodorani was talking about, is that in plasma cosmology, the tiny reflects the massive. It's all just, it's called plasma scaling. On a tiny scale, you can look at it and it reflects a much larger structural process. So Franklin flew his kite. He got lightning to strike it in a thunderstorm. It came down his cannabis hemp line down into his natural battery that he built. And he proved that the battery got charged by lightning in the same way as you can charge it through static electricity. And people didn't need to believe him, and they wouldn't have believed him, except he wrote letters to other scientists in Europe describing exactly what he did, and they were able to do the same thing, exactly the same. And so that's when it becomes convincing. And that's sort of the foundation, right? With the take nobody's word for it. They didn't take Benjamin Franklin's word for it because he's a smart guy. He described exactly what he did, and they did the exact same thing and produced the same effect. And that's why it's accepted. What do you think of that?
I mean, it's fascinating stuff. I mean, I still raise the question, why did Benjamin Franklin have bodies in his basement?
Well, he has a lot of personal issues,
okay,
like illegitimate children, and he was he was a major slave owner, right?
Yeah. So we dismiss Nikola Tesla because he married a fucking pigeon, but yet we still consider him a great scientist.
What's that about? I've never heard that.
Yeah, you got to look it up.
There's something like that.
Yeah, he had a kink with a pigeon. I get it. You're a lone scientist. People don't understand you. You need love. But I when I said take nobody's word for it, I said I meant more like you don't have to take the word that someone else believes, such as this is that. You can have your own stance and own thoughts on things as well too, and it doesn't dismiss anybody from hearing another person out. Was my kind of whole conjecture. I think science is real. I think science works. I just wonder who's using the term science. Because there's a lot of people I hear patriot that word, and it necessarily isn't something I would call reputable.
Well, man, when I was trying to look up like UFO podcasts and stuff, because I am like,
did I pop up?
No. Well, you've mentioned that you're trying not to pigeonhole yourself in any way, so maybe it's a good thing it didn't come up, right? But when you look up like UFO podcasts, science and stuff, a ton of podcasts come up that are like UFO skeptic podcast and all this stuff, and then you go into it and it's people just talking about how like UFOs are aliens. So people take on the language that generates certain perceptions in the audience. For example, if a believer calls their podcast the Skeptic UFO Podcast, they present as more maybe evidence-based than they are. Even if they sincerely feel that way, there's a different meaning to the word than it's being attributed. So language is very important.
It's also for clicks. Spotify put up a whole thing about words that you can use in your podcast and words that you can include in your title that will get you more clicks because it's what the audience retention rate is. Did you know when I started my podcast, I was 0.01% of types of podcasts that do this conversational style platform? Now first of all, Out of the Blank was the only thing that had out of the in it. And then you get into what it is now: out of the dark, out of the pothole, out of this, out of that, out of that. People just see something, they like the idea, they take a bit of it. I mean, it's not, you see that with researchers all the time. They'll hijack an article, or they'll take an article, mess with a few things, and then put their name on it as well too. What you do have to understand is what I understood with getting into the COVID topic about the origin of the pandemic and all that. A lot of people that signed articles that were fitting the narrative were just signing something to have their name on it. Necessarily did they read what it was actually about? Because a lot of those scientists have retracted and made statements saying that they actually don't agree with that. But you got to think you're doing your own independent research, which I say translated to any of these UFO articles that come out. You have all these people that get an article passed to them by a reputable person, a person that is honest or might be very well known. Even if you want to mention Peter McCullough, thoughts on him that might be different from whatever, it doesn't matter. He's a known name. So now you just sign your name on the document he wants you to co-author. Next thing you know, bam, you got another one added to your list. Look at ResearchGate. This is how I'm very, 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 very skeptical with ResearchGate. They have a bias 100%. Look at their followers on Twitter. None of them are people that agree with different views. They're all one view. That's it. It's insane. They follow every single vaccine company. It's fucking nuts.
Okay.
Or I'm like, no wonder I'm not finding anything else on this. And that's with a lot of institutions from scientists I've talked to. They say you need to get your articles from Germany. You need to get your articles from another thing that really doesn't have a lot of bias because they're not into the American politics of situations. Now with author, see, this is where we get into the topic of industry funded research. And it's a really dark rabbit hole where you start wondering, when you look at a tobacco study and they show you that there is no potential harm of tobacco chemicals, and you realize that the author of that entitled article happens to be one of the biggest tobacco companies out there, you start wondering if there's a bias in the research. Of course, you're not going to talk shit on the person that's funding your research. So when you look at these science institutions, when I bring up to a UFO person that you said this, and this just actually happened in an email, I go, your name was mentioned on this article on this UAP site, this scientific research for UAPs. And he goes, I don't know what you're talking about. I never made that statement. I go, there's a fucking clip of you right here saying you said that. Are you telling me you're not? No, I'm a physics scientist. I'm like, that's what they're using you as credit. Not real. But how is someone who's just reading going to know? Are they going to do the work and come across like I just did? No. So I just start going, you need to make sure that when you read an article and it has a bunch of names on it or a bunch of quotes, man, if you can, send an email to that person, because right now in the world of technology and how much articles and shit is accessible for everybody, it's very, very hard to tell if that person is actually saying the things that they're saying. Because I mean, I wonder if you would know the name of the person.
Maybe.
I don't know. I go on your UAP site all the time and I just kind of like
yeah.
look at the names that are there and I just keep asking people. I'm like, hey.
Nice. Yeah, and on my site I try to I do every single statement that
Eric Davis.
Yeah, Davis. I was mentioning him with his ball lightning research paper.
Oh, let's see.
That's just Okay, there it is. You actually got him to talk to you. That's hilarious. He's very hard to
He
communicate
declined my
with.
invitation, so I don't fucking know what that means. But yeah, he said, "Dear Robbie, I never said such a thing about UAPs. In any case, my employer, the Aerospace Corporation, doesn't allow me to give media, entertainment, or podcast, social network interviews." That's funny because I've interviewed 5 people from that place. But that's funny. I didn't know. The name sounded familiar.
Yes, he's a very well-known character with the UFO community.
Should I apologize?
Well, I mean, if he's not going to come on your show, that's up to you to decide. He's a controversial figure, and I guarantee if he ever watches this, he will be very unhappy with me pointing out the research paper I was describing, because in public he talks explicitly about how UFO crashes have happened. Material has been recovered from UFO crashes, and he's very clear about believing, or he said, suggests he has evidence to reasonably think that UFOs are alien technology of some kind. Obviously, highly controversial views, and he doesn't provide the evidence that would back up those views.
Well, I apologized. How about that?
Well, isn't that nice? Well, you were just apologizing.
Yeah,
that's hilarious. While I'm being critical of him, you're writing a message apologizing.
I gotta talk to him now.
No, he would be a very interesting person to talk to. But
I want to talk to everyone.
Yeah, no, he's a controversial guy. So actually, okay, let me just ask you this. I want to know what your take on this is. Eric Davis is in the UFO community well known because he claims he has briefed Congress secretly about how UFOs are real vehicles that have crashed, and the US government has crashed material, and there are all these black projects exploiting the real alien technology. Now, in private, in 2003, he was commissioned by the United States Air Force Research Lab to write a paper about ball lightning. And in that paper, he says UFOs are ball lightning, and he is very clear about it. And then he describes all of the mechanisms involved in ball lightning. And then he talks, like I mentioned earlier, he talks about being involved with Hal Puthoff and the Quorum and Quorum researchers about producing electricity through ball lightning research. So this is a guy in public up to present day saying, oh, they're aliens. And then in private, since at least 2003, he's commissioned by the government and writing reports about how UFOs are ball lightning. What do you make of that? What do you think of that?
I'm not going to answer that question. I don't know the guy. I'm not gonna do it.
Okay, fair enough.
I don't know. I mean,
I thought you said always speak your mind. You were telling me that the other day.
I know.
But no, I know you want him on the show, and that's a good reason. You could ask him himself if he's on here.
Question. But, It sounds like some off-air talk.
Yeah.
Thanks, everybody, for listening to this episode of Out of the Blank podcast. You'll be able to find Campbell on uapstudy.com. A lot of thorough research has been done into what we would call the deciphering of, is it aliens or is it more than likely weather phenomena? But also we change our opinion on the basis that we are taking more seriously the fact that now it's being talked about more. And we're very happy for the UFO community and the amount of work that they have put in, which they have done a good amount of work in as well, too. And I think the conversation should remain open, as well as the community should be as well, too. Thanks for listening to this episode of Out of the Blank. Stay tuned for our next episode.